Dear colleagues, the topic of my presentation is amendments, changes in the tax legislation at the time of the COVID. I would like to note from the very beginning that in the past year, two distinct trends can be clearly traced in the amendments introduced to the Russian tax legislation. On the one hand, clear that Russian state authorities try to reduce tax burden in order to help taxpayers to survive during this difficult time for economy and business. So were reduced tax rates, various benefits. On the other hand, provision of this tax benefit and payment of various subsidies obviously resulted in additional expenses for state funds. As a result, it can also be seen clearly that some amendments to the tax legislation have another purpose, is basically to increase in future tax payment for other categories of taxpayers. Therefore, basically, we can tell that the process which is going on now in the Russian tax legislation is to redistribute the tax burden between various taxpayers. So let's start. I would like to begin with the consequences related to the presidential decree about declaration of non-working day. 30th of March, the year 2020 could be considered as the beginning of the COVID in Russia because the president of the Russian Federation declared some period of time as non-working day. Then this period of time was prolonged several times, and in overall, they taking into account also the weekends and public holidays, Russian people had their longest non-working days period, 45 consecutive days, from March 28 to May 11 inclusive. Why this is important for tax implication? Because the Russian tax code provides for very important rule that if certain deadline or certain period of time ends on the weekend or the public holiday, it means that the last day of such period falls on the following working days. As a result of this non-working day period, all the deadlines were prolonged. All the deadlines for submission of tax declaration and for payment of taxes were obviously prolonged. And taxpayers could benefit from this prolongation. It's not a big deal, but nevertheless. Of course, in the president decree, there were some exceptions. Some companies could not use this period of non-working days because they continued to work. It's medical and pharmacy companies that sell food, that perform emergency work. You can see examples on the slide. However, such companies could also benefit from the amendments to the tax legislation. However, these amendments follow not from the presidential decree, but were introduced by the government of the Russian Federation in the resolution of that was issued 2nd of April. The government postponed the deadline for filing tax declaration and reporting forms, which falls on the period from March to June. So deadlines for submitting various tax declarations, tax calculation, personal income tax calculations, financial and accounting reports were extended for 3 months. Deadlines, for example, for submitting VAT declaration for the first quarter, as well as calculation of insurance contribution for the first quarter, was also extended until the 15th of May, the year 2020. Please note that these extensions could have been applied by all taxpayers, and also including these taxpayers that that could not enjoy the regime of non-working days period. So the next issue, this decision of the government also provided for deferral of deadlines for tax payment. As you can see, certain categories of taxpayers certain taxes could have been paid later. For example, for 6 months extension was provided in respect of corporate profit tax, tax paid by taxpayers who apply a simplified system of taxation for the year 2019, they could pay the tax 6 months later. Personal income tax for individual entrepreneurs and other taxes, including regional and municipal taxes like transport tax, corporate property tax, land tax, etc., etc. Deadlines were provided for different periods of time from 3 months to 6 months. It was mentioning that further in the following, the terms for payment of taxes were again postponed by the government decree for another 3 months, and basically such taxes like social security contributions for March could have been paid basically by the end of the year 2020. Also, at some point, Russian state authorities decided to waive some debts. Basically, it's debt for corporate profit tax for the second quarter, and similar taxes, not only corporate profit tax, but also, for example, tax paid on the simplified system of taxation for the second quarter, and other taxes. But the main problem that this extension of deadlines and this waiver of tax debts could have been applied only by a limited number of taxpayers. In order to enjoy this benefit, the taxpayers must meet the criteria of a small and medium-sized enterprise, first of all. Then the company must be recorded in the register of small and medium-sized enterprises as of the 1st of March the year 2020. And also they must operate in the area of economy in the economic sector most affected by COVID. So shortly about criteria to qualify as a small and medium-sized enterprise. The company, the average number of employees cannot exceed 250 people. This is a limitation for medium-sized businesses. The revenue of such company cannot exceed 2 billion rubles. Otherwise, it cannot be qualified as a small and medium-sized company. It also must meet requirements to the structure of share capital. For example, it's clearly stated that a state and municipal authority and certain types of public legal entity cannot own more than 25% of share capital of such company. Otherwise, they cannot be considered for the purposes of regulation as a small and medium-sized enterprises and cannot enjoy tax benefit. And also foreigners cannot own more than 49% of share capital of such small companies, small and medium-sized companies. However, in this respect, some exceptions were provided to the above restrictions. For example, criteria that foreigners cannot own more than 49% can be avoided of account for that if a foreign company itself satisfy the criteria of small or medium-sized company established by the Russian law, then a Russian legal entity, a Russian subsidiary, can actually be recognized as a small and medium-sized company. So if foreign company, average number of employee foreign company is only 250 person, and the income of such foreign company does not exceed 2 billion rubles, equivalent in foreign currency, then a Russian company, in fact, can be considered a small and medium-sized company and enjoy the benefits provided by the Russian legislation for such companies. It's important because, as we can see further, there are in fact various benefits for such small companies, and I know that in fact several Russian companies, which are subsidiaries of foreign companies, enjoy in fact currently these tax benefits, and it could be beneficial to comply with these requirements because the benefits are quite significant, as we can see further. But going back to the deadlines for payment of taxes, as I said, as I mentioned, the taxpayer could have used this deferral of tax payment if a taxpayer is a small or medium-sized company and also registered in the special register, state register. And moreover, it must have been registered as of the 1st of March. At last, this company must work in the area of economy most affected by COVID. This list of areas of economy most affected by COVID is established by the decree of the government of the Russian Federation. For example, various types of transportation, tourism, culture companies, some educational and catering foods, and other. So as a result, it's not difficult to see that with such restrictions, only very small portion of taxpayers were able to take advantage of these benefits. This is one of the main point of criticism now of the Russian authorities, because the most economists see that Russian authorities do not perform enough to support businesses in this difficult situation. Third type of measures implemented by the government in connection with COVID is postponement of control measures. It's obvious that in order to restrict, to limit spread of coronavirus, the government decided that various form of control should be postponed. Of course, the form of control which imply active interaction of state authorities, mainly tax authorities and taxpayer. So as a result, taking decision about conducting of on-site tax audit and decision about control of prices applied in transaction between interdependent affiliated companies were postponed, was introduced moratorium. Also, if such tax audit was already scheduled, then conducting such scheduled on-site tax audit was also postponed. Various measures of control of compliance with currency legislation, decisions about suspension of operation with money on the bank account and the transfer of money. If tax audit was actually performed and the tax authorities collected information, proofs that some taxpayers, for example, violated tax legislation, and the next step should be examination of these materials, hearing, for example, clarification, explanation of taxpayer, and taking decision, then this process was also suspended and postponed. At last, if tax authorities make, for example, request to provide the documentation, then taxpayers ordinarily must provide such information and documentation requested by tax authorities during 10 days period, and during the time of COVID, it was increased up to 20 days instead of 10, as you can see. So these are the main amendments introduced by the decision of the Russian government. Now I would like to propose to finish with examination of deferral of various deadlines for payment of taxes and examine what kind of amendments were adopted regarding calculation of taxes, what kind of benefits were provided to taxpayers. So let's start with the federal law, which introduced amendments to the Russian tax code. It has a retroactive force and applicable from the 1st of January, the year 2020. It provided for deductibility of certain types of expenses. Basically, it's a cost of purchasing of various medical devices for diagnosis or treatment of COVID. Also, disinfection of premises and, for example, expenses on purchase of personal protective equipment in order to comply with the various sanitary and hygienic requirements in connection with spread of coronavirus, will also declare it explicitly as a deductible expense. At the same time, this law also provided for exemption from taxation of certain types of income. Basically, it's about subsidies which are paid from the federal funds, from the federal budget in connection with the spread of coronavirus. And these types of subsidies paid by, for example, to small and medium-sized enterprises, as we have already discussed, which are recognized as small and medium-sized enterprises. This is not the only amendments, and we will see later further amendments to the corporate legislation. Now I would like to move to the amendments of the personal income tax, because it's also very important for Russia. And in these types of amendments can be clearly seen another type of amendments. I mean, not provision of benefits to taxpayers, but in fact making additional redistribution of this tax burden to certain categories of taxpayers. So let's start from the beginning. As the criteria of residency, in order to calculate personal income tax, it's important from the very beginning to determine the status of a person as a resident or non-resident. And Russian Federation uses the term of presence in the territory of Russia as a criteria for recognition, for determination of tax residence. As tax resident, Russia recognizes individuals that are actually present in the territory of Russia during the period of 183 days during any consecutive 12 months. And this term must be checked additionally at the end of each calendar year, that this is a tax period. So if taxpayers is present during calendar year for 183 calendar days in Russia or more, then he may be considered as a Russian tax resident individual. But it's clear that in the past year, in the 2020, the frontiers were closed. As a result, some individuals could not be, were not able to cross the border, and their presence in Russia was, in fact, shorter than this required period of time. As a result, Russian state authorities introduced amendments to the Russian tax code, and especially in the past year, a person could be recognized as a Russian tax resident if he was present in the territory of Russia for the period of only 90 days, basically from 90 days to 183 days. In order to be considered as a Russian tax resident, he must file application about these two tax authorities, and this application must be filed until the end of the period for submission of personal income tax declaration, that is 30th of April, the 2021 of this year. As a result, if some foreigners would like for some reason to be considered as a Russian tax resident, he may file this declaration even if he is only spent in Russia only 90 days. Next issue is related to the tax rate of the personal income tax. Of course, there are various tax rates applicable for various types of income in respect of the personal income tax, but general rate applicable to a Russian resident is only 13%. This was for quite a long period of time. This rate was applicable, and it's a flat rate. There was no progressive rates increased like in a lot of foreign countries. But starting from this year, in fact, Russian tax legislation, Russian tax code knows was also introduced 15% rate, which is applicable to income exceeding 6 million of rubles. In fact, this was started from the speech of the President of the Russian Federation to citizens of Russia. He announced introduction of a progressive tax rate of personal income tax. These amendments were called basically as tax on the rich, and the president claimed that additional amounts of the tax collected, which is estimated as 60 billion rubles, would be used for specific purposes, such as treatment of children with rare serious diseases, such as purchase of expensive medicine and rehabilitation facilities. So, of course, this idea to introduce a progressive personal income tax rate was in the air for some period of time, and the supporters of such approach usually refer to the experience of foreign countries and idea of social justice, whereas opponents of this system refer to the fact that such experience we had in the past and in the years of 90s, and as a result of such progressive tax rates, most wages, most salaries paid to employees were paid under the table, were paid in black, basically. And of course, there were concerns that such situation in introduction of this progressive rate in the amount of 15% may also result in the fact that salaries will be paid as black cash in envelopes. But nevertheless, authorities decided on this step and introduced quite small, comparatively low amount, the rate. And of course, it could be expected that in future, with further developments, if this approach will be considered as successful, then of course it can be expected that this rate will be further increased. It's obviously. So next amendments to the personal income tax is related to taxation of interest. Previously, interest were basically exempt from taxation because the Russian legislation provided for quite a big possibility to exempt such amount. It was provided that, for example, interest calculated at the rate of the Russian central bank, which is currently 4.25% plus 5%, that is 9.25%, are exempt. Currently, Russian banks, for example, pay interest accrued at the rate of 5-6% sometimes in Russian rubles. So obviously, all these 5 and 6% is below the 9.25%. As a result, they were all exempt. Starting from the years, the exemption is provided differently. The person must take 1 million rubles multiplied by key rate of the Russian Central Bank, which is, as I already mentioned, currently 4.25%. And the result can be exempt from personal income tax. So it's only 42.5 thousand rubles, which is slightly less than 500 euros, will be exempt according to these new rules. This is also considered as increase of tax burden on the taxpayers, presumably more rich taxpayers than average person, average Russian citizen. And so it was introduced, and starting from this year, we shall apply this approach. So next, amendments to the personal income tax legislation. It's more positive for taxpayer. The news is exemption of payment to medical professionals. Of course, starting in the year 2020, a lot of professionals worked for a long period of times, worked long hours, and received various additional payments. They were fighting with this coronavirus infection, and the legislator decided to exempt such payments from the taxation by personal income tax, which is, of course, positive news. Of course, there are certain restrictions of limitations. The Russian authorities clearly state that recipient, the medical professional, must participate in the detection, prevention, this coronavirus infection. The money must be transferred to this person on the basis of federal law or act of president or government, and the source of funding of such money must be, of course, federal budget or the regional budget. That is the amendments introduced to Russian tax legislation in respect of personal income tax. Of course, amendments introduced to this tax is not the only amendments which aimed at an increase of the tax burden. Another measure for support of state finances was in amendments of taxation of payments of dividends paid to foreign companies. What is the matter? Again, the Russian president, in his speech made in March 2020, said that the need to change the taxation applicable to those taxpayers who pull out income from Russia in the form of dividends to foreign accounts. The pull out, basically выводить in Russian, has a very negative connotation. It means that even if formally all the requirements of the Russian legislation were complied with, in fact, in essence, this is a wrong activity of Russian citizens, which under the form of dividends try to kind of weaken the Russian economy by paying dividends on foreign accounts and then using such funds in foreign accounts to buy, I don't know, various luxury things abroad instead of putting this money into Russian economy. As a result, the proposed amendments was to increase tax on dividends paid to foreign companies, which is in fact companies which are registered at request of such Russian rich people, just basically conduit companies. So as a result, the Russian government was given the instruction, the task to propose the relevant amendments to certain foreign countries. Russian authorities held negotiations with authorities of the Republic of Cyprus, Republic of Malta, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. And on the slide, you may see the changes introduced to double tax treaty by the protocol in respect of taxation of dividends paid to Cyprus companies. As it was proposed by Russian president, the 15% general rate for dividends was established. And the reduced rate, beneficial rate 5%, can be applied only in a very limited list of situations. Of course, foreign company, as a Cyprus company, first of all, must be resident of this foreign state, Cyprus. Then this company must also be beneficial owner of such income. It cannot be simply a recipient conduit companies that further repays these dividends to another foreign state. It must be definitely beneficial owner. And at last, this company also must be either insurance institution or pension fund, government or political subdivision or local authority, or the central bank of Cyprus, or at least public company whose shares are traded on the market stock exchange, as a stock exchange market, and has, for example, at least 15% of its voting shares in free circulation. And this foreign company must own at least 15% of the shares of the Russian company paying dividends. And this period of holding of ownership must be at least 365 days. Of course, it's obvious that only a small number of companies will be able to comply with these requirements, and most dividends paid to Cyprus company will be in fact subject to 15% taxation rate. These amendments temporarily applicable since the 1st of January this year, even if not all formalities, I mean ratification in both countries were complied with. The same amendments were introduced to the double tax treaty between Russia and Malta. I will not go into discuss it further. You may see the results on the slide. Basically, all the same rules and conditions. Similar amendments were made in respect of double tax treaty between Russia and Luxembourg. However, these amendments did not come into force as of 1st of January 2021, because according to the mass media, Luxembourg authorities did not manage for some reason to perform all the necessary steps required by the local legislation, and as a result this protocol was not approved by both states and did not come into force as it was supposed to be. The last country with which the negotiations were held is the Netherlands. The same conditions, the same rates were proposed to the authorities of the Netherlands, but so far there is only information that the Netherlands refused to accept these proposed amendments, and as a result, recently Russian Ministry of Finances initiated procedure for the termination of this agreement, for withdrawal of Russia from this agreement. This is not a big news, I would say. The same news we had when negotiations with Cyprus were started, and the same was in case of Luxembourg. But then, after some time, foreign authorities agreed to accept the amendments proposed by Russian authorities. So it's a kind of blackmail, I would say, from the Russian state authorities. But so far they were successful. I don't know what happens in case of Netherlands. I believe that some kind of compromise must be found. Maybe not all the proposals of the Russian authorities must be accepted, but nevertheless, it's clear that the Netherlands, as well as other already mentioned states, were famous jurisdiction to be used by Russian rich people, by Russian oligarch, I would say, to decrease tax burden in Russia and to hold assets in Russia. So as a result, I believe that some way or another way, the double tax treaty with Netherlands will also be amended. We will see this, how the situation develops in the near future. Now, I would like to move to another tax. It's not exactly a tax, it's a contribution, mandatory payment for social security of the employees. This is quite significant and burdensome mandatory payment which must be made in connection to payment of wages, salary, bonuses to employees. It's necessary to insure such people and pay amounts of contribution to pension fund, social security contribution, and medical contributions. And of course, the system is the following. For each year, Russian authorities provide for the amount of maximum base. For example, in the past year, the maximum base for pension fund contribution was 1,292,000 rubles. In this year, this maximum base was increased to 1,465,000 rubles. Why this is important? The same for social security contribution and for medical contribution. How this must be calculated? Basically, it says that the Russian legislation says that, for example, the employer, the Russian company that pays salary to employee must also calculate or pay to the Russian budget at its own expense these social security contributions. And the rates applicable for pension for maximum rates and applicable to amounts which exceed the maximum base are different. For example, on this slide, you may see the general rates, and you may see that, for example, amounts paid to employee within the maximum base shall be subject to pension contribution at 20% rate. By social contribution, 2.9%, and the medical contribution, 5.1%. And in total, the amount is subject to taxation at 30% rate, which is quite significant for Russian companies, for Russian taxpayers. If the salary for calendar year, salary of certain employee exceeds this threshold, then the rate will be reduced. For example, for pension contribution, it will be reduced to 10%. In social security contribution, there will be no payments. Medical contribution will be still 5.1%, and the total rate for the payments to employees will be 15.1%. So it will be decreased. But generally, as you may already know, the salaries in Russia are not so very big. For example, as of 1st of January of this year, In Moscow, quite a rich region, there was information that average salary is 88,000 rubles. And it means that for a year, it will be a amount slightly more than 1 million rubles. As a result, you can see that all this amount will be considered as amount which is subject to taxation at biggest rate. It will be payment within the maximum base. As a result, it will be 30% of social security contributions, which must be paid by employer. And this is quite significant amount. As a result, of course, it's obviously and it's clear why the Russian tax authority, why the Russian taxpayers always glad to have various benefits and various exemption in respect of these taxes. And on this slide, you may see special rates established for small and medium-sized enterprises. So you may see that the base rate applicable for maximum base will be, instead of 30%, only 15%. And the same 15% will be applied to the amounts paid in situation when, for some reason, the total amount of payment to employee will exceed this threshold, will exceed the maximum base established by the Russian legislation. Of course, 15% is much significant benefit for companies, and it's applicable, as I already said, to small and medium-sized enterprises. And the criteria for recognition of the company as a small and medium-sized enterprises we have already discussed previously. The main, of course, limitation is the number of employees, which cannot exceed 250 persons, and the income, which cannot exceed 2 billion rubles. So the next issues I would like to discuss is corporate profit tax benefits which are provided for medical and educational companies. 0% rate may be applied, 0% tax rate may be applied by medical and educational companies in respect of the profits which they receive in the year 2021. In fact, this is not a new tax rate because this 0% rate was also applicable in the past year, including the year 2020, but it was supposed that this 0% rate can be applied for a limited period of time until the end of the year 2020, and starting from the year, this year. It was supposed to be taxed at general rate of the corporate profit tax, which is 20%. But the legislator decided to prolong this possibility, the 0% tax rate, for an indefinite period of time. Of course, there are some terms and conditions for application of this beneficial rate. Company must perform certain types of educational and medical activities. Company must have a license for performance of these activities. Income of the company must be generated by exactly these activities for at least 90%. Company must have at least 15 employees or even more. And in case of medical companies, at least 50% of their employees must have certificate of specialist or certificate about accreditation. Otherwise, this benefit cannot be applied. Also, company cannot perform transaction with bill of exchange and derivatives. Next benefit which I would like to discuss, to mention, is benefits provided for IT companies. Russian tax authorities clearly would like to develop this area of economy and provides for various benefits for IT companies. For example, they provided exemption in respect of VAT, reduced corporate profit tax rates, and social security contribution. As you may see on the slide, in case of VAT, they provided exemption. So it states that sale, realization of exclusive rights to software and databases, which included in the unified register of Russian programs and databases, as well as the rights to use such software, are exempt from the VAT. This rule is in fact was in the Russian legislation even before, but starting from this year, the software must be registered in this register of Russian programs. Otherwise, the exemption cannot be applied. This is not exactly beneficial treatment for taxpayers. It's additional obstacle that was introduced to the Russian legislation. However, this obstacle is quite a formal one and can be easily overcome by this registration of Russian program in this register. More important is the fact that Russian legislator decided to provide for reduced corporate profit tax rate. As I have already mentioned, the general rate of corporate profit tax is 20%. But IT companies, certain types of IT companies can enjoy the beneficial as a reduced rate in the amount of only 3%. These 3% must be paid to the federal authorities, and 0% must be paid to regional authorities. It can be applied by the IT companies that develop and implement computer programs or provide for the rights on the basis of license agreements, rights to use such computer programs. Of course, there are certain types of conditions. The company must have accreditation. Again, the income from this activity must be mainly generated by exactly these activities. For 90% or even more, and the average number of employees must be at least 7 persons. And of course, if company violates this condition, then the corporate profit tax must be recalculated from the beginning of the tax period, which in Russia corresponds to the calendar year. Again, about social security contribution, it's also provided for Russian legislation provides for reduced rates of social security contribution, as you may see, and the reduced rates even more beneficial than in case of small and medium-sized enterprises. These rates were, for example, the reduced rate, you may see basically on the slide, it's only 6% pension contribution, social security 1.5%, and medical contribution is 0.1%. So in total, it's only 7.6% of the social security contribution instead of 30. That is very beneficial and very convenient, and of course it's clear that Russian authorities try to retain Russian specialists in Russia so that they would be working in the Russian economy rather than try to immigrate to some foreign state in order to use beneficial treatment, bigger salaries abroad. That were the main topics, topics which I wanted to present, and maybe you have any questions. I would be glad to answer.
Thank you, Andrey. While probably our audience is putting their questions in the chat, I have a question for you. Uh, as you track the situation with the taxes, what do you think? Do we are able, or is there any signs if we can expect further deferrals and postponements of payment of taxes during this year, because COVID is still in place, although there some restrictions are already taken off in Russia, at least. But is there anything further we can expect? Because I understand previous year all postponements of deadlines for payments and for providing all the reports already passed. So what do you think?
Well, yes, exactly. Mainly the restrictions for doing business in Russia were terminated, I mean cancelled by Russian authorities more and more. We have here possibility to go to the offices, to work normally. So as a result, of course, it cannot be expected that further benefits like deferral of taxes would be provided to authorities by authorities in big volumes. Secondly, I would say that it's difficult to determine if certain amendments are connected with COVID situation or just with general approach of the Russian authorities, their ideas and implementation of the tax policy which were supposed to be taken in any case, even if in a situation with absence of this situation of COVID. Of course, we can expect, for example, further negotiation with the Netherlands. We can also expect that some other countries which are famous for as a low tax jurisdiction may receive proposal from Russian authorities about introduction of amendments to the double tax treaty with such countries. I do not expect that highly, well, such reputable countries like France and Italy and other similar countries will receive such proposal, but nevertheless, who knows? So it's the trends is basically to increase taxes on the rich and to try to release from taxation the poor people, I would say, is this way.
Thank you. It sounds like social, quite social approach and not bad. We have two questions from our audience, from Mr. Sergio. The first question is, he asks for more information on deadline, which is 30th of April this year, 2021, to apply for fiscal residency in Russia. Is it due for all foreigners?
Yes, basically, if a foreigner was actually present in Russia for the period of at least 90 days, and from 90 days to 182 days, then this foreigner can apply for the Russian residency. It's not important, for example, if this foreigner was a Russian resident in the previous years. It's important that this foreigner actually spend at least 90 days in Russia in the year 2020, and if he wishes so, he may file an application and be recognized as a Russian tax resident. Of course, it's necessary to consider and take into account that Russian tax residents pay Russian personal income tax in respect of all incomes, I mean worldwide income received not only from Russia, but also from abroad, from Italy, from France, etc., etc. So if such income was not taxed in Russia before, then this foreigner would have to file also a tax declaration and pay the tax for the previous year.
Just one short question. Meaning 2020, we mean period from January, financial tax year from January 2020 till end of December 2020.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thanks. And the second question, I hope we answered, otherwise please let us know in the chat. Question on reduced social contribution for small and medium enterprises. If it is the small medium enterprises controlled by foreign investor, 100%, if it's applicable in this situation.
Yes, exactly. That was the point, that ordinary, normally, foreign investor can own only 49%. However, each foreign investor is corresponds to the definition of small and medium enterprises which are provided for Russian companies. That means if the foreign investor the income of the foreign investor does not exceed 2 billion rubles or equal amount in foreign currency, and if the foreign investor, the employees, the number of employees of the foreign investor does not exceed 250 persons, and this foreign investor, third criteria, is not registered in the offshore jurisdiction according to the list approved by the Russian Ministry of Finances, then this foreign investor may own Russian company, and the Russian company may be recognized to be small and medium-sized enterprise. Yes, it is possible, exactly. And I know that for some taxpayers, we performed this work for recognition. Of course, some formalities must be complied with because it's necessary to prove that foreign investor really has this income. It must be provided for Russian authorities, for Russian audit company, financial documentations. Upon review of such documentation, a Russian audit company can make a report to the tax authorities that foreign company complies with these limitations, and as a result, on basis of this information, Russian tax authorities will register a Russian company owned by foreign investor for 100% in the special register, and then these benefits can be applied in respect of social security contributions also.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you. Very clear answer. I understand that there can be some further details in the process, but it's subject to additional questions, and if needed, I'm sure you can in more details or provide help outside of the webinar.